The black luxury SUVs rolled one after another through the iron gates of Harbor Point Yacht Club. Valets hurried between gleaming sports cars worth more than most homes in the county. Women in elegant evening gowns stepped onto the red carpet. Men in tailored tuxedos laughed as photographers captured every smile. Tonight's annual Veterans Charity Gala wasn't just another fundraiser. It was the social event of the year. Politicians, business executives, real estate developers, retired military officers, television reporters. Everyone important had been invited. Everyone, except the man who had spent nearly 40 years working only a few hundred yards away. Elias Turner adjusted the collar of his old navy blue jacket. It wasn't expensive. The fabric had faded after years of careful use. His polished shoes had been repaired more times than he could remember. His hands told the real story. Rough, scarred, permanent lines of hard labor carved into every finger. For 38 years, those hands had tied ships to these docks through hurricanes, winter storms, and dangerous tides. The harbor knew his footsteps. The fishermen trusted him. Cargo captains greeted him by name. But tonight, nobody recognized him. The invitation rested neatly inside his jacket pocket. Cream-colored paper, gold lettering, official seal. He had read it dozens of times. Harbor Heroes Veterans Charity Gala. Special guest. Elias smiled quietly. He still wasn't sure who had mailed it. No return address. No explanation. Only a handwritten note. Your presence matters. He had almost stayed home. People like him rarely belonged at places like Harbor Point. But something about the letter felt genuine. So he came. 2 security guards stood beside the entrance. One glanced briefly at Elias before looking away. The other frowned immediately. Can I help you? Elias nodded politely. I believe I have an invitation. The younger guard barely looked at the envelope before shaking his head. Service in trance is around back. I'm not delivering anything. The guard crossed his arms. This event is private. I understand. Elias carefully unfolded the invitation. My name is Elias Turner. The guard didn't even read it completely. I'm going to save both of us some embarrassment. Several guests slowed their pace. People always notice conflict, especially when it involves someone who obviously didn't belong. A wealthy couple approaching the entrance stopped nearby. The husband whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. They're getting bolder every year. His wife laughed, probably looking for leftovers. Several nearby guests smiled. Nobody corrected them. Elias remained calm. Years on the docks had taught him something valuable. Storms eventually passed. So did insults. I was invited, Elias repeated. The younger guard sighed dramatically. Sir, he emphasized the word with obvious sarcasm. This gala raises millions of dollars. Exactly. So unless you own a yacht parked outside. He looked Elias up and down. You're probably confused. Laughter spread through the growing crowd. Someone raised a phone. Recording had become entertainment. Across the marina, dozens of massive yachts floated silently beneath strings of elegant lights. Some belonged to billionaires. Others had crews larger than the families living nearby. Elias knew every vessel. He had helped secure many of them during violent storms. He remembered the nights wealthy owners stayed safely in hotels while dock workers fought 50-foot waves to keep those yachts from smashing into each other. No reporters covered those nights. No photographers came then. Only ordinary workers. Maybe check the kitchen, another guest joked. They always need dishwashers. More laughter. Elias simply folded the invitation. I'll wait. The younger guard smirked. Wait for what? The person who invited me. You really think someone's coming? Edo. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers illuminated hundreds of perfectly arranged tables. A military band quietly played patriotic music. Auction items filled one side of the hall. Historic naval paintings, signed football jerseys, luxury vacations, rare watches, everything designed to attract enormous donations. On stage stood the evening's organizer, Charles Whitmore, Harbor Point's wealthiest developer, owner of half the city's waterfront. Magazine covers called him a visionary. Employees called him something else, just never where he could hear. Charles adjusted his tuxedo while checking the evening schedule. Has Admiral Hayes arrived yet? His assistant glanced at her tablet. Not yet. He'll be here. The television crews are waiting. Charles smiled confidently. The retired four-star admiral was the evening's guest of honor. Having him attend guaranteed publicity, donations, political connections, everything Charles valued. He wanted a flawless evening. No distractions. Outside, a distraction had already begun. Nearly 30 guests had gathered around the entrance. Most weren't helping. Conflict was more interesting than conversation. The younger guard looked increasingly annoyed. You've been standing here 15 minutes. I don't mind. We do. I'll stay out of everyone's way. One woman shook her head. The audacity. Another whispered. People always try to sneak into charity events. The irony escaped everyone. For a moment, he wasn't standing outside a glamorous yacht club. He was 22 years old again. Cold ocean winds. Steel decks. Engines roaring beneath his feet. Young sailors laughing despite impossible odds. Faces he hadn't thought about in decades. He quietly pushed the memories away. Some belonged in the past. A sleek silver convertible stopped near the entrance. Out stepped Blake Whitmore. Charleson, 32 years old. Expensive watch. Designer tuxedo. Perfect smile practiced for magazine interviews. He noticed the small crowd immediately. What's going on? The younger guard grinned. Just someone who thinks he's invited. Blake glanced toward Elias. His smile disappeared. Seriously? He walked closer. You got 30 seconds. Elias answered calmly. I was invited. Blake chuckled. My father hosts this event. Then perhaps he can clarify. He doesn't know you. You don't know that. The crowd murmured. Blake hated being challenged, especially publicly. He snatched the invitation from Elias's hand. Quickly scanning it, his expression hardened. It looked authentic. Official seal. Correct signature. Everything appeared legitimate. But admitting that would weaken his authority. So he simply folded it in half. This invitation must be counterfeit. Then he dropped it onto the pavement. Silence. Even some guests looked uncomfortable. Elias slowly bent down, carefully picked up the invitation, smoothed the crease with weathered fingers. He said nothing. Sometimes dignity spoke louder than anger. Inside the ballroom, staff members received an unexpected message through their radios. A motorcade had just entered the property. Not one limousine. Not two. 5 black government vehicles. The retired admiral had arrived. Every executive hurried toward the entrance. Television cameras repositioned instantly. Charles Whitmore smiled. Everything was finally going according to plan. He had no idea. The most important moment of the evening wasn't waiting inside the ballroom. It was standing quietly outside the front gate, holding a folded invitation and wearing a faded blue jacket. The first black SUV rolled to a smooth stop beneath the grand entrance. Then the second. Then the third. Within seconds, flashing camera lights turned the marina into a sea of white. Television reporters straightened their microphones. Photographers crowded behind velvet ropes. The military band outside immediately switched to a ceremonial march. Charles Whitmore smiled with satisfaction. This, he whispered to his assistant, is exactly the publicity we needed. Guests applauded as uniformed naval officers stepped from the vehicles. Their crisp white dress uniforms gleamed beneath the harbor lights. Every movement was disciplined, every salute perfectly timed. Then the rear door of the final SUV slowly opened. Out stepped Admiral Richard Hayes. Even in retirement, his presence commanded silence. His silver hair was neatly trimmed. His dark navy dress uniform displayed decades of distinguished service. Rows of ribbons reflected the evening lights. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent a lifetime making impossible decisions. Charles hurried forward with both hands extended. Admiral Hayes, Harbor Point is honored to welcome you. The admiral nodded politely. Thank you. Charles gestured toward the ballroom. Everyone is waiting inside. But before taking a single step, the admiral stopped. His eyes drifted past Charles. past the photographers, past the reporters. They settled on one man, standing quietly beside the entrance. Underdog verker, holding a folded invitation. For several long seconds, the Admiral didn't move. His expression changed. Confusion, recognition, then disbelief. He took one slow step forward. Another, ignoring everyone trying to greet him. Charles frowned. Admiral? No answer. The Admiral continued walking, straight toward Elias Turner. The crowd instinctively parted. Conversations faded. Cameras slowly turned away from the celebrities. Every lens followed the Admiral instead. Elias looked up. At first, he didn't recognize the distinguished officer approaching him. 40 years changes a man. Gray replaces black. Wrinkles replace youth. Time softens even the strongest faces. Then the Admiral smiled. A genuine smile. One rarely seen by the public. Elias. The dock worker stared for a moment. Then his tired eyes widened. Richard. The Admiral laughed softly. My goodness. It really is you. Before anyone could understand what was happening, Admiral Richard Hayes stood perfectly straight, raised his right hand, and delivered a flawless military salute. Not a casual greeting. A full salute, directed toward the dock worker. The entire entrance froze. Photographers stopped taking pictures. Reporters lowered their microphones. Even the military band fell silent. No one spoke, because everyone knew one thing. Decorated admirals do not salute civilians without extraordinary reason. Elias looked almost embarrassed. He quietly returned a respectful nod. You don't have to do that anymore. The Admiral smiled. I never stopped. A whisper spread through the crowd. Who is that man? Did the Admiral just salute a dock worker? Is he retired military? Charles Whitmore's confident smile disappeared. He forced a laugh. There must be some misunderstanding. The Admiral turned slowly toward him. There is. Charles relaxed slightly. I'm glad we agree. The Admiral's eyes hardened. The misunderstanding is yours. Silence returned. Charles cleared his throat. I'm afraid I don't understand. No, the Admiral replied calmly. I don't believe you do. He turned back toward Elias. They wouldn't let you inside? Elias shrugged. It's their event. They said the invitation wasn't real. The Admiral extended his hand. May I? Elias handed him the slightly creased invitation. The Admiral unfolded it carefully. His expression softened. I remember requesting this personally. Charles blinked. You requested it? 3 weeks ago. The Admiral looked directly at Charles. I specifically instructed that Mr. Elias Turner receive a place of honor at tonight's gala. Several executives exchanged nervous glances. Charles's assistant quickly opened her tablet. Her fingers raced across the guest list. A few moments later, her face turned pale. Sir, Charles looked at her. She swallowed hard. He's listed. Charles frowned. What? Front table. She looked again. Seat number 3. The realization hit everyone at once. The invitation had been genuine. The guest they had publicly humiliated had been one of the evening's most important attendees. Blake Whitmore suddenly felt every eye in the crowd turning toward him. His earlier confidence vanished. There must have been some mistake. The Admiral spoke without raising his voice. There was. He looked toward the crumpled invitation. You dropped it on the ground. No one moved. No one defended Blake. The cameras captured everything. Charles forced another smile. It's all right. No, the Admiral replied. It isn't. His tone wasn't angry. It was disappointed. And somehow, that sounded much worse. The Admiral faced the gathering crowd. I've attended ceremonies around the world. I've met presidents, kings, prime ministers. But I've learned something. A person's character isn't measured by how they treat powerful people. It's measured by how they treat those they believe have nothing to offer. Several guests quietly looked down. The word struck harder than anyone expected. Charles attempted to redirect the evening. Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside. The Admiral didn't move. Not yet. He turned once more toward Elias. I've been looking for you for years. Elias looked surprised. For me? I owed you something. You owe me nothing. The Admiral smiled sadly. You still say that. A reporter stepped forward. Admiral Hayes, if I may ask, how do you know Mr. Turner? The Admiral remained silent for several seconds. His eyes drifted toward the dark harbor. The water reflected the moonlight, almost exactly as it had 41 years earlier. I first met Elias during the worst night of my life. The crowd leaned closer. Even the cameras seemed to wait. It was the winter of 1985. Our destroyer had suffered catastrophic damage during a rescue operation. The storm had become impossible. Waves taller than buildings. Visibility almost zero. We lost power. Several retired sailors in the audience exchanged serious glances. They knew those conditions. They also knew what usually happened next. The Admiral continued. We managed to reach this harbor, but the engines failed completely. The ship drifted toward the rocks. If we struck them, he paused. Nearly 300 sailors would have died. The crowd had become completely silent. The only sound was the gentle movement of water against the docks. Charles slowly realized this wasn't simply an old military story. It was about the quiet man standing beside him. The Admiral looked directly at Elias. Our harbor crew was ordered to stay ashore. The storm was too dangerous. No rescue boats. No do cruz. No volunteers. Everyone was told to wait until daylight. He smiled faintly. Everyone, except one stubborn young dock worker. Elias lowered his eyes. The Admiral continued. He ignored every order. He climbed into a small tugboat. Alone, the reporters stared in disbelief. He crossed waves no boat should have survived. He secured our ship. He kept us away from the rocks. And because of him, the Admiral's voice grew quiet. Every one of us went home. No one spoke, not even the reporters. Then the Admiral added one final sentence. The Navy gave me medals for that mission. He looked at Elias. But the bravest man there never received anything. The silence became almost unbearable. Across the harbor, the wind carried the sound of distant waves. Elias simply smiled. I was just doing my job. The Admiral shook his head. No, you saved 300 lives. But that's only part of the story. He looked toward the ballroom, then back at Elias. What happened after that night is something this town has never been told. And suddenly, Charles Whitmore felt a knot form in his stomach. Because whatever secret the Admiral was about to reveal, it was clear that it would change far more than one evening. It could change the reputation of some of the most powerful people in Harbor Point. The harbor had fallen completely silent. No one cared about the gala anymore. Crystal chandeliers still glowed through the ballroom windows. The orchestra waited inside. Auction tables stood untouched. Yet every guest remained outside, their attention fixed on two men standing beneath the entrance lights. One wore rows of medals earned over decades of service. The other wore a faded blue jacket stained by years of honest work. Admiral Richard Hayes looked across the crowd before speaking again. The official report of that rescue ended with our ship reaching safety. He paused, but the official report wasn't the whole truth. A ripple of whispers spread through the audience. Charles Whitmore folded his arms, forcing a smile that no longer reached his eyes. I'm sure it's an incredible story, Admiral, but perhaps this isn't the time. It is exactly the time. The Admiral's voice was calm, but firm enough to stop Charles mid-sentence. He reached into the inner pocket of his dress uniform. From a weathered leather folder, he carefully removed an old envelope. Its edges had yellowed with age. The Navy seal was barely visible. I've carried this for 41 years. Every camera zoomed in. This letter was written the morning after the rescue. He unfolded the paper with remarkable care. I recommended dock worker First Class Elias Turner for the Navy's highest civilian life-saving recognition. Gasps echoed through the crowd. I also recommended that the Port Authority create a permanent maritime safety training program under his leadership. The Admiral looked down for a moment. Neither recommendation was ever approved. A reporter raised a hand. Why not? The Admiral's expression darkened. Politics. The word landed heavily. The harbor's executives feared admitting that an untrained civilian had succeeded where official rescue plans had failed. They believed it would expose dangerous weaknesses in the port's emergency system. So instead, they buried the report. The whispers became louder. Charles Whitmore shifted uncomfortably. His assistant stared at him. "Sir." Charles ignored her. The Admiral continued. The public was told the storm had simply passed. No one mentioned the tugboat. No one mentioned Elias. No one mentioned that 300 sailors were alive because one dock worker refused to abandon them. Elias quietly lowered his head. "I never wanted recognition." "I know." The Admiral smiled. "That's exactly why you deserved it." A voice suddenly interrupted. "That's impossible." Everyone turned. An elderly man stepped forward from the back of the crowd. His silver cane clicked softly against the stone walkway. Several guests recognized him immediately. Martin Caldwell, former chairman of the Harbor Authority, now 90 years old. His face had gone pale. "I remember that report." The crowd stared. Martin looked directly at Elias. "We were told to destroy every copy." Silence. Charles slowly turned toward Martin. "What are you saying?" Martin sighed deeply. "We were afraid. Afraid the newspapers would ask why our emergency systems failed. Afraid investors would pull out. So we protected the harbor's reputation." His voice trembled. "And we sacrificed one honest man's name." Several guests exchanged horrified looks. A reporter asked quietly, "You knew?" Martin nodded. "I knew. And I signed the order." The confession hit like thunder. Dozens of cameras captured every second. Live broadcasts continued uninterrupted. Within minutes, millions of viewers would witness Harbor Point's carefully hidden history unraveling in real time. Charles stepped forward. "That decision happened decades before my company existed." The Admiral nodded. "You're correct." Charles smiled with relief. But the Admiral wasn't finished. "However, your company inherited those archived records." Charles's expression froze. The Admiral looked toward one of the younger naval officers. "Commander." The officer stepped forward carrying a slim metal case. He opened it. Inside were copies of scanned documents, letters, emergency reports, port records, training recommendations. Everything carefully preserved. The Admiral handed one file to a reporter, another to the city's mayor, another to the chairman of the Veterans Foundation. "The truth has waited long enough." Charles's hands began to shake. "Sir, I found something." She held up her tablet. "Our company digitized the old harbor archives 5 years ago." Charles stared at her. "What about them?" She swallowed hard. "Someone accessed Elias Turner's file. Last month." The crowd murmured again. Charles frowned. "Who?" She looked at the screen. "Your office." Blake's face drained of color. His father slowly turned toward him. "You knew about this?" Blake hesitated. I only skimmed it." "You read the report?" "Yes." "And you still threw his invitation on the ground?" Blake couldn't answer. The silence was broken by a slow clap. One person, then another. Soon dozens of veterans in attendance stood from the crowd. They applauded. Not loudly, not dramatically, respectfully. One by one, retired sailors stepped forward. Several removed their caps. Others saluted. Then active duty naval officers followed. Within moments, every uniformed service member present stood at attention facing Elias Turner. The Admiral raised his hand once more. Every sailor beside him did the same. The harbor entrance transformed into an unexpected military ceremony. No speeches, no rehearsals, just gratitude. Elias looked overwhelmed. "You don't have to do this." The Admiral smiled. "We should have done it 41 years ago." The mayor slowly approached. "Mr. Turner, I owe you an apology. So does this city." He extended his hand. Elias accepted it. Then came the chairman of the Veterans Foundation. "We would be honored if you accepted tonight's Harbor Hero Award." Elias gently shook his head. "I didn't come here for awards. I came because someone sent me an invitation." The Admiral chuckled softly. "I did, and I'm glad you trusted it." Inside the ballroom, the evening schedule was quietly rewritten. The auction was delayed. The keynote speech was canceled. Instead, organizers carried a simple wooden chair onto the stage. Not a throne, not a grand seat, just an ordinary chair. Exactly the kind Elias would have chosen himself. The audience rose as he entered, not because he demanded attention, but because humility had earned what wealth never could. The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. Elias looked uncomfortable the entire time. Finally, the applause faded. A microphone was placed before him. He cleared his throat. "I don't really know what to say." A few gentle laughs echoed through the room. "I tied ropes. I fixed docks. I showed up every morning. That's all." He looked toward the young workers serving dinner. The people who keep a town running. They usually aren't the ones standing on stages. They're the ones cleaning them afterward. Silence filled the ballroom. "So, if you remember anything about tonight," he smiled softly, "remember the people whose names you never ask. They might be carrying your future without you ever noticing." Months later, the city council voted unanimously to rename the old East Harbor Pier. It would forever be known as Turner Pier. A bronze plaque stood near the water. It read, "In honor of Elias Turner, whose courage saved 300 lives and whose humility inspired generations. True heroes seek no applause, yet deserve to be remembered forever." Nearby, a new maritime safety academy opened its doors. Young dock workers trained there every year. Above the entrance hung another simple inscription: "Quiet competence is still courage." Elias continued working at the harbor for another 2 years. He refused a private office. He refused special treatment. Every morning, he drank coffee from the same old diner overlooking the docks. Every afternoon, he greeted fishermen by name. Nothing about him changed, except one thing. People finally stopped walking past him without saying hello. On one peaceful evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Admiral Hayes joined Elias at the end of Turner Pier. They watched the tide roll in. For a long time, neither man spoke. Finally, the Admiral broke the silence. "Do you ever wish they'd recognize you sooner?" Elias smiled at the water. "No." The Admiral looked surprised. "Why not?" Elias picked up a small stone and skipped it across the calm harbor. "Because doing the right thing only matters if you'd still do it when nobody is watching." The Admiral nodded slowly. The waves carried the final echoes of daylight across the harbor. 2 old friends sat quietly beside the water. One had worn medals. The other had never needed them. Yet history would remember them both, not for the titles they held, but for the character they carried.